A gray dawn spread across northern France. On the long stretch of sand, waves lapped gently, carrying the salt of the sea and the faint scent of gunpowder that lingered in the air. Amid the thin mist, tens of thousands of men stood shoulder to shoulder, silent. They did not cheer, they did not speak. They simply stared out toward the sea, toward the hazy horizon where they hoped to see ships that would take them home. It was May 1940. The British and French armies had been driven to the brink of despair. Hitler's Blitzkrieg had shattered the Western Front in mere weeks. Allied forces were cut off, surrounded, and pushed back until they were trapped on a narrow strip of sand called Dunkirk, where the line between life and death was only a wave apart. Above them, the roar of German aircraft thundered like distant storms. Below, exhausted, hungry, and disoriented soldiers stood in endless lines, waiting for something none could be sure would ever come. They didn't know if they would survive to see home again. But deep down, every man understood one truth. If they fell here, the soul of Britain would fall with them. In the spring of 1940, the world had witnessed a storm of steel unlike any before. Nazi Germany, with its Blitzkrieg, its lightning war, had torn through Europe's defenses. France, once proud of having the strongest army on the continent, collapsed in weeks. Hundreds of thousands of British soldiers were caught in the catastrophe. They hadn't lost because they lacked courage. They lost because they were unprepared, too slow, and their enemy was too fast, too ruthless. By May 20th, German armored divisions had reached the English Channel. The British and French armies were trapped between two advancing pincers. Before them lay the sea. Behind them the Germans. No way out, no hope left. British officers stared blankly at their maps. Every hour the encirclement tightened. Ammunition was running out. Shells and bombs rained down relentlessly. The young soldiers, barely 18 or 19, lay flat in the sand, clutching their rifles, hearts pounding. They knew that without a miracle, this beach would become their grave. And then in that moment of despair, a decision was made, one that history would never forget: evacuation. Not surrender, not retreat out of cowardice, but survival to fight another day. The order was given: Operation Dynamo. It was launched from a small underground command room in Dover, England. Its mission: rescue as many soldiers as possible from the beaches of Dunkirk. The generals knew they couldn't save everyone. They hoped, if luck was kind, to bring 30,000 men home. But none of them knew that what was about to happen would defy all expectations. It would become the miracle of Dunkirk. Meanwhile, in Dunkirk, hell continued to unfold. The beach, once a place of calm, had become a graveyard. Bodies, wrecked ships, and burned-out vehicles lay scattered across the sand. Black smoke covered the sky, blotting out the sun. The only sounds left were the drone of engines, the whine of shells, and the screams of men. Tens of thousands of British and French soldiers stood on the sand, eyes fixed on the sea. They could see ships on the horizon too far to reach, too few to save them all. Each time a ship came ashore, hundreds fought to board while thousands watched it sail away hopeless. Some knelt to pray. Others simply clenched their rifles, not to fight, but to hold on to the last shred of dignity they had. Above them, the Luftwaffe circled like vultures. Bombs fell exploding across sea and sand. Each blast tore another soul from the earth. There were no walls, no shelters, no trenches, only sky, sand, and sea. And yet amid this inferno, something extraordinary was happening across the Channel. When word of Dunkirk's disaster reached England, the entire nation trembled. Not just the government, but ordinary people understood that if Dunkirk fell, Britain would fall with it. And so, in an act of courage, the world had never seen, thousands of fishermen, merchants, sailors, and civilians volunteered to sail into war. They had no orders. They had no weapons. They only had courage. Little fishing boats, yachts, and sailboats began leaving the harbors. A civilian armada, the little ships of Dunkirk, set course for a burning horizon. They knew they might die, but still they went. These tiny vessels weaved through smoke and shellfire. German planes swooped low, bullets ripping through the air. Middle-aged fishermen, teenage boys, retired sailors, all rowed, steered, and pulled men from the water. Many boats were destroyed, but many more arrived. Day after day, small groups of soldiers were ferried from the beaches to larger ships bound for England. One young soldier, his face covered in soot, his uniform torn, looked out to sea and saw a small boat approaching. He thought to himself, "They've come for us." And when he stepped aboard, he wept not from fear, but from the realization that someone had not abandoned them. On the beaches, others continued to fight not with bullets, but with time. French units stayed behind to hold the line, knowing they would likely never leave. They built barricades and fought hour by hour, giving the British time to escape. And they succeeded. They gave their lives so others could live. Amid smoke and fire, Dunkirk became a symbol of sacrifice and brotherhood. No one there called themselves a hero, but every man did something heroic. After 9 brutal days, the operation ended. 338,000 soldiers, far more than anyone dared to hope, had been rescued. They left behind tanks, guns, and gear, but they saved what mattered most: men. When the ships reached England, crowds gathered at the docks. No one cheered for victory, they welcomed survivors. Many soldiers said nothing. They simply sat, trembling hands in their laps, eyes downcast. They had seen too much. But within those eyes, amid pain, exhaustion, and fear, there was light. A faint, defiant light. They were alive. And so was Britain. When Prime Minister Winston Churchill heard of the evacuation's success, he spoke before Parliament. "We shall never surrender. Even if we fight on the seas, on the beaches, in the air, we shall never give in." Those words were not to celebrate victory, but to affirm that Dunkirk's survival was the beginning of resistance. Dunkirk was not a military victory. It was a moral one, a triumph of courage, hope, and humanity amid despair. A reminder that even when everything seems lost, there is always a way home if we do not give up. On the evening of June 4th, the waves at Dunkirk turned calm again. The wind blew over the sands, over the wrecked ships, over the rusting guns. But beneath the sand lay the blood of those who had fallen, and the memory of a miracle not made by gods but by men. In a world of war and death, Dunkirk was not the end. It was the beginning of a long journey where those who survived would one day return stronger to finish what they had begun. And they did return 4 years later on other beaches, carrying with them the memory of Dunkirk. The place where they once fled became the place where they advanced. What was once defeat became faith, because they had learned this truth. Sometimes retreat is not the end, it is the beginning of victory. Today, the wind still blows over Dunkirk's shores and the waves still crash upon the sand. But if you listen closely beyond the sound of the sea, you can still hear faint echoes of those who once stood there, those who never surrendered. They remain a symbol of one simple yet eternal truth. Courage is not found in victory, but in the refusal to yield.